After 3 weeks without having any named storms during the peak of hurricane season, the hurricane season in the Atlantic has reactivated. We are currently looking at our moisture map, and you can see there's actually a few storms in a few areas we are keeping an eye on. Specifically, we'll look at the National Hurricane Center, what you guys need to know, and what I see coming to the future. And let's head right to the National Hurricane Center's portal. Looking at the National Hurricane Center, you might notice there are 3 separate areas to watch here. First, starting off with our tropical storm Gabrielle right here. Taking a zoomed in look for this storm here, looking at the forecast cone, take a look at Bermuda is center stage in this hurricane forecast cone. So currently the tropical storm is very northeast heavy, so you can see the center of circulation is designated by that X right there. Then the tropical storm force winds that are pretty far out of the center right now are in the yellow, and the forecast cone across goes to the northwest of the circulation, very far north of Puerto Rico and the Lesser Antilles, eventually reaching hurricane status by possibly Sunday of this coming up weekend, and then reaching Bermuda sometime maybe early Monday morning. So generally speaking, not really going to be a United States threat, and I kind of want to look at some things that really are playing into the full forecast for direction and strength-wise of the storm. You may notice it takes at least almost a week, or we get at least a half a week to get to hurricane force strength right here. A large factor in this tropical storm not strengthening at least immediately is the dry air. Taking a look at the water vapor satellite imagery from our GO satellite up in the air, we can see our center of circulation is designated where my mouse is circling right off of here, and notice that really warm, even red color right there. That is very dry air. Warmer colors are designated by dry. Green and blues are designated by moist. And where we have our actual convection and thunderstorms firing off on the northeast side of the storm, that is where we have the really moist air. But look at the dry air wrapping into the center of circulation of this actual storm. So to combat that, the storm really needs to start to circulate around its center. So the exact center is right probably where the convection is starting to fire off, but because there is that dry air intruding on the center, it really is going to cause some major problems for the storm to organize. However, the models are looking at the future. They know this is happening, and this dry air only has a limited time on it. So this limited time is going to keep it at tropical storm force strength, at least for the next probably 5-ish days as it moves northwest towards Bermuda. And eventually, once the dry air gets ingested and then thrown out of the storm and the moist air wraps around the center, that is where we can start to see some more intensification towards our next hurricane of the season. So let's look at some models now that we have that background information to see where this is going and our confidence level on that. So the first model we're going to take a look at is the Google AI weather models. You can see all those low pressures are different ensemble members trying to decide exactly what's going to happen to the storm. And as you can see, very great consensus, at least Google-wise, that this storm is going to continue its track northwestward, eventually turn north and then northeast out towards the sea. Not before it becomes a strong hurricane. You can see those pinks. Try to ignore those other models. We're getting a little bit to the towards the tail end of this exact model. But let's look at this one more time. So that tropical storm force strength is in the green there. So lots of greens. Obviously, we're already tropical storm. And then we start to etch into the further strengthening and eventually some pretty high-end strengthening towards the end of the week. And starting in Monday as well, where we might see our next hurricane. So models are pretty certain right there. I was going to say way far away from the United States. So let's take a look at a different model run for a different opinion, a second opinion on the storm. So let's take a look at the Euro for our second opinion model. This one is interesting. So a very similar track to the Google AI models, but a little bit further west. This is where you would start to get a little bit more concerned for areas of Bermuda. And then a big thing I want to point out is the different colors of the lines there. You see how there's a lot of blues and pinks and oranges, especially when we get towards Bermuda. That is low confidence on the strength of this incoming storm. Now, strength for tropical storms and specifically hurricanes is very tricky, especially with our ongoing models today. Especially this season, they've been kind of tricky as well to figure out. So something to really consider that we actually might not even see a hurricane out of the storm, but a lot of models are between, there's just a wide spread. There is the spread of the very strong hurricane, And then all the way on the other side, we have spread a very weak tropical storm, talking about 35 to 40 mile per hour winds. So I think the next coming hours are very crucial, next coming days, because the storm does have to beat that dry air first before we get to a hurricane. And I think that's what the models are at least trying to figure out is this storm going to beat out the dry air? And if it does, will it start to strengthen? One thing I also like to point out on this exact frame here is warm waters are designated at least above average for this time of season, is designated in those warmer colors, those reds and darker reds. And across the entire Atlantic, especially across the areas that are close to Bermuda, we have very warm waters. So if it can avoid some shear and get rid of that dry air, I do think I'd lean on the area that we might see our next hurricane out of the system. And really, for the United States wise, I don't think this is going to be a major issue, at least this coming wave here. So let's take a pause on that and then switch gears and look at something else. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about is the storms, or the zone of storms, especially the two zones we have right on the heels of our current tropical storm. You might notice these two separate zones. I know it's a little bit hard to see because they are actually overlaid each other, but we'll look at one at a time. First, starting off with this one with a 20% chance of development within the next 7 days. Now, models have not been very bullish on this one, meaning they've been keeping them weak, and actually a lot of the ensemble models, specifically on the Euro, have been having the storm form just maybe a brief tropical storm and then start to dissipate. There is very high shear in front of it, and there actually will be increased shear because of the current tropical storm. The exhaust from other tropical storms can be not good for development for other storms. So that's something where I'd say was this tropical wave, it has some robustness to it, but I just don't think it will have enough energy to fully get through. Of course, it's something to watch, but another zone that was designated is right on the heels of the other one. So don't get confused. It's kind of the same similar zone of area, but this tropical wave is actually still on the continent of Africa. Once it leaves here in the next 5 to 7 days and gets into this zone, the similar to zone that we've been seeing development all year, at least the limited development we've seen, we have another 20% chance of development within the next 7 days. A tropical wave is forecasted to move off the coast of West Africa by Friday, which I just said, and some slow development of the system is possible as it moves west-northwestward across the eastern tropical Atlantic into this early weekend. So there you go. We kind of have 3 areas to watch. We'll bring all the risk areas kind of on the map. At least I call them 3 areas of interest. Our current tropical storm, which I'd say as of right now, we are getting almost to the point where we can say, United States impacts, unless there is tremendous change in our forecast. But I just don't see that happening, especially with a large scale steering in place. We're going to have a weak area of kind of low pressure, eventually pull this storm to the northeast, even maybe away from Bermuda. Let's hope it stays away from Bermuda, but definitely still has a chance to get involved with Bermuda there. So Bermuda, definitely monitor. Eastern United States, I'd say, watch the weather, keep it in your mind, but overall, I think this is not going to be a worry. For the eastern United States and the Gulf Coast for the United States, I'd say these next 2 waves are something also that are very low likelihood of impacting, especially in the next 10 days. The thing I would have to put on the radar for the actual Gulf Coast here is start to see some homegrown storms. If you guys don't know what that means, is right now we have the zone of main development. The main development region is where we're having all this activity. It's basically the same zone here with that yellow right there. But when we're talking about storms that form close to home, we're talking about storms that form right off the Mexican coast, in the Gulf, in the Caribbean. This actually sees more activity during the month of October compared to our main development region, at least climatology-wise. Because it's been a pretty quiet season, we will see how this develops, at least immediately within the next 7 days, not seeing anything threat-wise. On the Google AI models, though, there is a slight signal for something forming within kind of the next week, but it's something that we'll continue to monitor as we progress through our season. Really don't see any main concerns as of right now, but a good reminder that even though we've seen a very quiet season overall, does not mean we'll have a quiet season to end off on. That's not how climatology works usually for hurricane season, and of course it only takes one impacting storm. That's one thing I have to say is the waters, especially in the Gulf, are very warm. So if we even a gap of time of just a week where we have lower wind shear and lower dry air, and we just have some convection fire off, we could have some major issues. That's what's my main concern for this hurricane season, at least for the tail end of it. Now, time will tell if there will be updates on that. If you enjoyed this video, if you don't mind giving a like and a share so we can get the word out about hurricane season coming back here. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day, and stay safe out there. Subscribe for more weather and tropical updates as we continue to monitor the situation.